guide to the Bhagavad Gita. We are especially humbled to be joined today by the author himself, H.D.Goswami, Goswami, also known as Srila Charidev, affectionately and reverentially. And I guess I could say professionally and academically, Dr. Howard Resnick. And just to say a little bit about you, H.D. Goswami is one of the most senior and respected spiritual leaders of the Hare Krishna movement, which introduced Bhakti Yoga and Krishna consciousness to the world at a time when it was almost exclusively practiced in India. In 1969, after attending a campus lecture delivered by Bhaktivedanta Swami, H.D. decided to take up the monastic practice of Bhakti Yoga by living in and serving at the Hare Krishna temple in Los Angeles. In the following year, he took a formal initiation into the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. In 1972, at the ripe age of 23, he was accepted into the renounced order of life as a sannyasi and gained the honorific title of Goswami. In 1974, under the instructions of his spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, H.D. Goswami opened up Bhakti Yoga centers in over a dozen countries. In 1991, H.D. returned to the University of California as a student of world religions. And by 1996, he received his PhDs in both Sanskrit and Indian studies. And I guess
not at UCLA.
That's right. That was Harvard. Is that right? That's
yeah.
Right. At Harvard. Yeah. So I could say a lot more about our esteemed guest, but without further ado, H.D. Goswami, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. And actually, the first temple ashram I lived in was in Berkeley.
Oh, okay.
Berkeley, California.
Oh,
so thank you all for coming. Perhaps, Danesa, you could introduce the topic tonight.
Yeah, so again, this is a book club where we're reading from your comprehensive guide. And relevant to what we've read up to this point, I was hoping you could speak to us about the soul itself and its relationship with karma and its relationship with yagya, or the act of making offerings or sacrifice.
Okay. Okay, the good news is we're eternal. Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna begins his teachings to Arjuna by explaining the basic ontology of life. Ontology is the branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of existence itself. Like what, in the most fundamental sense, what really exists. It's just like, for example, if you take physics, where the physical world presents itself to our senses, we can see it, touch it, and so on and so forth. And yet, when we do physics, or actually even before people had, let's say, a sophisticated science of physics, people knew that you can take a material object and you can break it down into smaller pieces and break those into smaller pieces. And so there was even a theory of roughly 2,500 years ago, a philosopher named Democritus, who put forward the idea that ultimately all of the physical world is made up of atoms. And so the first atomic theory in the West was about 2,500 years ago. And the word atom, atom in Greek actually means indivisible. So is the idea that you break things up into the smallest components, and that's how you understand what the world is. So, and of course, quantum physics, which basically studies subatomic particles, now actually doesn't know what matter is. So to say that one is a materialist nowadays actually is kind of silly, since no one actually knows what matter is, at least not through material science. But anyway, ultimately, so Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, the specific verse is in chapter 2, Nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha, ubhayor, and so on. So the idea is there are fundamentally two kinds of things that exist in the world. Actually, in this world or any other world, this universe or any other universe, or in the sort of higher class worlds that exist beyond the material universes. And these two things are matter And you could say it's the physical reality and the metaphysical. Metaphysical meaning beyond the physical in Greek. So, and here's how Krishna distinguishes these two. Material things, although matter itself cannot be created or destroyed, as science would agree, conservation of matter, but any material object, like, for example, your computer or your head, or Iceland, the island, or whatever, or Jupiter, any material thing in that particular form, it didn't exist before. It comes to exist as a particular vikara, Krishna's word, a particular transformation of matter, and then at a certain time it stops existing, whether it is an ice cube or a galaxy. And actually, the Greeks had a word for this, which in English became the word substance. If you think of the word substance, sub, of course, means below, as in, we all live in a yellow submarine, something that goes beneath the water. And then stance is from Sanskrit stan, actually. It means to stand. So it stands below the surface. So we can talk about galaxies or ice cubes or anything else, but beneath that appearance, there is actually just matter itself, the material energy itself that forms itself into innumerable different shapes. And so, although matter cannot be created or destroyed, according to the Bhagavad Gita and according to science, the particular forms that matter takes, like your body, those things begin and end. In radical contrast to that, Krishna explains, there is another energy in the universe and beyond the universe, which is Atma, which means self or consciousness or soul. And that's you and me and God himself. It's very interesting because Krishna, generally there are three categories of fundamental things, which are God, souls, and matter. These are three fundamental categories, ontological categories, the kinds of real things that exist. And yet, when Krishna is talking about how things exist, he includes himself in the same category as souls. So we as conscious living beings or selves, or whatever word you use, Krishna says, Natvevaham jatu nasam, which means in Sanskrit, this is right at the beginning of the Gita, never did I not exist. Never did I not exist, natvam, nor you. So we share literally a godly quality, which is that we have always existed. If you think about this, it's what we used to call back in the day a mind blower. It's the fact that we have always existed. So 1 million years ago, you were around somewhere. Obviously not in the body you have now, obviously perhaps not on this planet, but you were doing something. And Krishna says, Nachaiva na bhavishyama sarvevayam. So translating the Sanskrit very literally, nor is it the case that we will not exist. Krishna uses the double negative there. Nor is it the case that we will not exist. Sarvevayam, literally all of us. Atak param, forever after. So we have always existed. If you think about how amazing and majestic and powerful that fact is that we have always existed, then you can see that our, no offense intended, petty concerns, all the things that we amazingly worry about as if they were important, are actually trivial. Compared to that fact that you have always existed, like trillions of years ago, you were up to something. So compared to that fact, the things we worry about are, of course, not that important. And the fact that we will exist forever. And so therefore, just as we make decisions like, okay, am I going to go to college? What am I going to study? Or after that, what kind of job do I want? What kind of career, profession? who do I want to marry, or do I not want to just marry, like whatever. There's all kinds of life decisions we make. And the reason those decisions are important because they influence the rest of our life. However, the rest of our life in the context of forever is a very, very tiny amount of time. And so if someone really understands this, that we are eternal, we are not matter, then it's a game changer in terms of your set of values, how you prioritize different activities, what's important, what's not important, what should I do, what shouldn't I do, what activities that I now do, perhaps I shouldn't be doing, and what activities that I'm not doing, perhaps I'd better start doing because what's at stake is my eternal existence, or what kind of existence I'll have. So if someone can understand this, and someone can say, well, how do I know that's true? I mean, frankly, surviving beats not surviving. And so how do I know that's true? Krishna gives a simple example in the 2nd chapter of the Gita, where he actually proves that we are not our bodies. We are in our bodies, and we are doing business as a body, such, whatever your nationality or ethnicity or age or orientation or profession or whatever. We're doing business in the world as bodies, but we couldn't possibly be our bodies. And I'll explain Krishna's argument there. And to explain Krishna's logical argument, which shows that it's impossible that you are your body, I'm going to take a little help from René Descartes, a very important French philosopher and scientist and mathematician who was a true genius and who lived in the 1600s. So Descartes did something very radical at the time, which is he said, I'm going to perform a mental experiment. And that is, I'm going to imagine, or actually I'm going to doubt everything I think I know, including that there's really a world outside my mind, that I exist, that I'm in a body, that I live in France or whatever. I'm going to doubt everything, that there even is such a thing as France or Europe or the earth. And so he said, okay, if I just for now, I will doubt everything. And then he asked himself, is there something which I cannot doubt? Is there something which I, as a sane human being, cannot reasonably, logically doubt? And he came up with something. And he expressed it in Latin, because that was kind of like because in Europe at that time, not only did they have the languages we know, like French, German, and English, but back in those days, they had all kinds of regional dialects in all these countries. There were hundreds of languages in Europe. And therefore, so that educated people could communicate, they did so in Latin. So anyway, so Descartes said the one thing I cannot sanely, reasonably doubt is that I exist. And he said it in Latin, cogito ergo sum. I'm thinking, cogito, like cognition, I'm thinking, therefore, ergo, I exist. Because I couldn't be thinking if I didn't exist. And so the reason I mentioned Descartes here in relation to the Gita is because what Descartes proved in my mind is that the one thing you know more surely than you know anything else is that you exist. Even if, let's say, worst case scenario, you're just a bottle in a brain in the laboratory of some evil genius, as Descartes said, and actually there is no such thing as Las Vegas, which is kind of tempting. But anyway, so even if there was no such thing as Las Vegas or America or the universe, what if all this was just, these were ideas you're being programmed to believe? What if the universe is just like a gigantic version of Universal Studios? and that we're just in a virtual reality machine. So even if that were the case, the one thing which you know for sure is that you exist, because even if you're wrong, it's still you who are thinking wrongly. So the one thing you cannot be wrong about is that you exist and you're thinking. Now, going back to the Gita and Krishna, so you know more than you know anything else that you exist as an individual conscious being. And yet, and you know that you have continuous existence. For example, we commonly say, I was born in, I don't know, Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania or something. Actually, I wasn't, but someone was. I mean, I'm sure they have hospitals there. So you say, I was a child. I was an adolescent. Now I'm an adult. And so by saying that I was born here and then I lived there and then this happened, you are admitting, you are testifying, perhaps unintentionally, that you are the same person you were. Now we know that you are not in the same body. For example, every 2 weeks, your skin is replaced by another skin. So you're not in the same skin you were in 2 weeks ago. And all the parts of your body are, because you're technically not in exactly the same body you were in when this class started. Because millions of very sophisticated biological and especially microbiological events are taking place every moment within us, and our body's constantly changing. You're digesting food, you're breathing in, you're breathing out. I mean, a million things are going on inside that we're not even aware of. And so it's simply not the same body. The famous pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus once said famously, or at least it's famous that they say he said, that you can't step in the same river twice. Interestingly, at the time of Buddha, when Buddha appeared in this world and kind of emphasized the temporary nature, the ephemeral nature of this world, that Buddha's void, he never thought that nothing exists. So if anyone thinks that, that's not what Buddha was teaching. What Buddha was teaching is that nothing exists in this sense, that there's no fixed object, that every physical object is constantly transforming, some slowly, some more quickly, but everything is in a state of flux. And therefore, you cannot point to anything in the universe that's just constantly and permanently the same thing. And so in that sense, the world is void. But so this idea was going around because it was also being preached in Europe. For example, Heraclitus famously is said to have said that you can't step in the same river twice. You can't step in the same river twice because it's changing. And so my version of that is you can't breathe in the same body twice because it's changed in some ways. So therefore you have two objects which precisely match the two fundamental kinds of things that Krishna talks about. And that is, you have matter, which is in constant flux, whether it's your body or a river or a galaxy, matter is constantly changing. And then you have the soul, which is not changing in the sense that it's always the same thing. So that you say, I was a baby, I was a child, I was a teenager. You admit it's you, but it wasn't the same body. If you say, when I was 5 years old, I was really cute. So, fine. I'm not disputing that. Maybe you were really cute when you were 5 years old. But the point is that that's not the same body. It's a different body than you have now. Your 5-year-old body didn't just stretch into your adult body. It's a different body made of different physical elements. So you are the same person. You're not in the same body. Therefore, it's logically impossible that you are your body. And so if you understand this, then this whole material world where you have a first name and a last name, and there are pictures of you, and there are, whatever. The body is not you. It's just the costume you happen to be in right now. And so, since we're not the body, it's, as they say, it's a brand new ball game. And I mean, because then we really have to think about this. If I'm actually not the body, but I'm the consciousness within the body, then maybe I should give a lot of attention to find out what and who I really am. And that's what yoga is about. The word yoga comes from a Sanskrit root yuj, which means to link. And so yoga means the linking process in which you, the soul, connect. First of all, you connect to your real self. And then you connect to the supreme self, or Krishna, or God. So we still have, by the way, in English, we still have some words that come from this ancient Sanskrit root, which is yuj, from which you get the word yoga. For example, we have words like conjugal, which means intimate connection. And then there's the word yoke, in the sense of not the part of the egg, but to yoke two things together. So the English word yoke, meaning to connect two things, is yoga. It's the same word, because English is an Indo-European language. So then, if I can introduce one other logical principle here from the Bhagavad Gita, and that is, it's very common that we understand things by understanding where they come from. For example, let's say there's a disease and the medical industry is searching for a cure for this disease. So you start with the effect, not the cause. This in Sanskrit is called Satkaryavad. It's the idea that anything in the world is the effect of something else. So that, for example, let's say something happens in America, like let's say there were midterm congressional elections. Actually, I shouldn't talk about American politics. I don't want to depress everyone, but let's say, for example, there were midterm congressional elections and there were certain results. These people won, these people lost. And then if you're a political analyst or a political historian, you start with the effect and you work your way backward in time to figure out, why did this happen? Whether it's a political event or a medical event, or let's say people go for therapy. And so you have to understand, well, where do I come from? Who are my parents? What kind of childhood did I have? Because it's assumed that to understand who you are now, either physically or psychologically, we have to understand where it all came from. And that can mean, let's say, investigating your genetics or your psychology, whatever. So this is a general principle that everything that you're trying to understand is the effect of some cause. And so if you're trying to understand the universe, it's the effect of a cause. If you're trying to understand yourself, then a good question would be not only who are my parents, or what kind of neighborhood did I grow up in, or et cetera, but where do I come from in a higher sense? What is the ultimate cause of my existence as an eternal conscious being? How did I get to be one? Or where does that all come from? And of course, as far as the universe, it's the Big Bang, which is kind of, one way it's a very interesting scientific theory, which, by the way, is also found in this ancient Sanskrit literature, which talks about an expanding universe. But the real question is, the real question in cosmology is, or cosmogony, what is the source of the universe, is where did the Big Bang come from? Because the Big Bang couldn't have happened according to the physical laws of nature, because before the Big Bang, there were no laws of nature. It's not until the universe comes out that there even are the laws of nature, space and time and everything else. And so what laws produced a universe before there were laws of nature? Anyway, So if we're trying to understand where it all comes from, ultimately you're going to come to something like God. And, if someone, due to, I don't know, unpleasant childhood experiences, has, some aversion to that word, use another word. The absolute truth. We shouldn't get hung up over vocabulary. But the source of everything. And in fact, in Vedanta and in the Bhagavatam, it begins Janma Yasya Jataha. The absolute truth is the source of everything, including ourselves. And it's by understanding that source and connecting with it that we're actually practicing yoga. Connecting with the source of our own existence. So again, consider this world. Beauty is very important to us. Otherwise, how could it be possible that actors, people just act, could be important personalities? That is itself is inconceivable. It's funny because if you look at actors, the social status of actors before Hollywood, before movies, they were just actors. No one thought they were very important people. But then when technology threw them up on the big screen and they become bigger than life, then suddenly it's like people actually want to know what actors think about things, which is itself amazing. Unless the actor happens to be very intelligent, but then their opinion is worthwhile not because they're an actor, but because that person is intelligent. But in any case, we value beauty. Beautiful scenes in nature, beautiful faces, beautiful bodies. We're just naturally drawn to beauty. And there is beauty in the universe. If you look at magnified pictures of sand grains, it turns out they look like jewels. And there's you can't count the sand grains. The number of sand grains on the earth is a ridiculously big number. And yet every one of them is like a jewel. Snowflakes, water crystals, galaxies, human bodies. If you look at the universe, it's obvious that it comes from someone or some in consciousness with a very refined sense of beauty. So it's a universe not only of laws of nature, but of art. We live in an artistic universe. And if you study microbiology, you will find that the engineering involved in living bodies is absurdly sophisticated. It makes the most advanced computers we have seem basically like children's toys. Microbiology, every cell in your body is like a fully digitized Amazon warehouse. Every cell in your body has a computer in it. So actually, there's been a huge revolution in the world of science and philosophy against materialism because Darwin was operating with actually what we would now consider a very primitive understanding of human biology. And so from what we now know about biology and microbiology, it is becoming obvious that it's absurd to say that these super absurdly sophisticated machines came about just by wind blowing, rain falling, seismic shaking, little electric shock from lightning bolt. To say that this produced these absurdly advanced machines is people are seeing it's absurd. So therefore, if you're talking about the source of the universe, you have to talk about some power that has an extremely refined artistic sense, some force that has an inconceivable, unimaginable level of engineering skill, a force that has a very refined moral sense. This was put forward by Kant, the German philosopher who sometimes got some things right. So it's Kant that explained that we have an intrinsic moral compass. We know, for example, that it's profoundly wrong, evil, to harm innocent people, to cause significant pain and harm to innocent people. We know that's wrong. And we know it as surely as we know anything. We know it as surely as we know the world exists. And we know that certain acts, which may bring us to tears, certain acts of charity, of compassion, of kindness, move us profoundly in the core of our hearts. We know that there is such a thing as love, and that it can't be reduced to simple, mechanical psychology. Love is something beyond neurological mechanics. And so therefore, if all these things that exist in the universe, a profound moral compass, which some people ignore, but a profound moral compass, incredible art, unimaginable sophistication of engineering, love, all these things, and if whatever exists in an effect must exist in the cause, because otherwise it could not be the cause. For example, let's say we see an object flying across space, and someone says, well, I think there was some kid in Philadelphia that threw that. It was a rock, and some kid in Philadelphia threw that rock. And now it's flying across space at thousands of miles an hour. That would be an absurd explanation, because that kid in Philadelphia does not have the power to throw something out into space like that. So the cause has to be sufficient, adequate to explain the effect. And so if we just open our eyes and take a look at the universe, it's clear that whatever caused the universe is personal, because we find that the more advanced a creature is, even in terms of mundane evolution, the more personal it is. Have you ever met a snail with a charismatic personality? So the point is that if you look at, say the scale of being, or as creatures evolve, we won't talk now about, how did evolution take place, but just from simpler creatures to more advanced creatures, the more advanced a creature is in terms of intelligence and consciousness, the more personal it is. If you're waiting in line to pay for your groceries or something, and the person that's checking you out is just very impersonal, cold, does not at all respond or reciprocate with you in a personal way, do you think that that person is like an advanced human being? No. So between species, and even within the human order, we take sensitivity, personal sensitivity, as a sign of higher evolution. So that's the nature of the universe. It's wired for moral conscience. Personal consciousness is higher than impersonal consciousness. It's artistic. It displays unimaginable intelligence in terms of the engineering, in terms of so many things. And so what can you postulate? What could you possibly reasonably propose as a cause that would be adequate to explain the universe that we're actually living in? And clearly, the only possibility that would even, never mind if it existed, that would just be logically adequate to explain the universe, is a being that has inconceivable consciousness, a conscious being that is artistic, that is ethical, that is personal, and so on and so forth, because nothing else would be adequate logically to explain the universe we actually live in. So, and then there's Bhagavad Gita. And so the words Bhagavad Gita, or the song of God or the Lord, the Bhagavad Gita claims to be a text which the source of everything personally gave us, personally spoke, because the universe comes with a user's manual. Like all, and so, as the old saying goes, if everything else fails, read the directions. It's like when, like let's say someone orders something from IKEA or something. Some people do that. And, it comes in a big box and some guy says, I don't need to read the directions. I know how to put this together. And then about 3 days later, he says, well, where'd you put the directions? So if everything else fails, read the directions. And so the Bhagavad Gita is a user's manual for souls living in the universe. And Krishna is explaining very clearly and very simply how to solve all your problems, how to be happier than you ever thought you could be, and how to reclaim what is your rightful possession, which is an eternal life of unlimited happiness and love. You actually have a right to that if you want to claim it. It's like, let's say someone has rich parents. The parents, want to give that child a very large inheritance, but the kid says, no, I don't want it. I'd rather, sleep on the sidewalk and whatever. So the point is, the inheritance is there. If you want it, claim it. You have a right, actually, to not die, to live forever, to have perfect happiness, perfect love, perfect relationships, to experience the world in a way you never imagined it could be experienced. I mean, it's yours if you claim it. If you don't claim it, then, well, it's always there. The idea that God gives us only one life to figure everything out is absurd. Obviously, I mean, it takes time to change and it takes time to learn. And so in a sense, you have an unlimited time frame to figure all this out, but why not do it in this life? Why not do it now? So that's basically Bhagavad Gita. And in a large nutshell, but so at this point, perhaps any questions you have, I'd be very happy to take a whack at them if you have any questions. Oh, Sarvatma put his hand up.
I did, thank you. Of these advanced beings that you were describing, a supermarket cashier as not a very evolved one, but of the most advanced beings, of the, let's say, Paramahamsa, transcendentalist, someone who is actually super mundane in their vision, how do they see time? How do they understand time if they are really advanced?
Okay, first of all, let's go into the psychology of time. In other words, we have an experience, or what we believe is an experience of the past. For example, you can think about something that happened a year ago or 5 years ago, and for us, that happened in the past. Or, for example, we can imagine what's going to happen a year from now, and so we are conceiving of the future. Hollywood, in their dreams, thinks there's time travel. But anyway, won't go into that. So psychologically, why is it, what enables you to imagine that there is such a thing as past, present, and future? What enables your imagining that there's a past is simply that there are lots of things and situations that don't exist anymore. So we say something occurred in the past when it's no longer present. Like, for example, when I was 10 years old, I had a 10-year-old body. For a slight fee, I will send you digital photographs. That was a joke. So when I was 10 years old, I had a 10-year-old body, and that body doesn't exist anymore. It just doesn't exist anymore. And so because it existed and now it doesn't, it's only a memory. Therefore, we say it happened in the past. Same thing, things are going to happen in the future. They're not happening now, so they're the future. As they say in Spanish, el avenir, that which is to come. It's interesting, they say the same thing in German, if you know German, Zukunft, which is avenir, that which is to come. Anyway, so, but what if everything that's really important still exists? Anything really important that ever existed still exists. Not that your 10-year-old body is in a parallel universe, but that the matter, the actual physical matter, which constituted your 10-year-old body, that matter still exists. That particular configuration, your 10-year-old body doesn't exist, but the matter exists and you exist. So actually nothing has really been lost. It's a change. Matter is changing its form, but the same matter always exists. So the matter that constituted your 10-year-old body still exists in the universe. And in the future, there's no new matter that doesn't exist now that's going to come in the future. And as far as you or me or all of us, we're eternal. And so when you realize that everything that exists now has always existed and always will exist, then it looks different. So then you say nothing has really been lost. Because whatever condition you were in, let's say when you were 10 years old or 5, or let's say in a past life, or let's say 50 past lives ago, whatever you were doing in your body, physical body, either in this life or in past lives, it wasn't really you. I mean, it was really you inside the body, but you took on a false identity, or I took on, for example, let's say 5 lives ago, I was a ship captain, or I was, I don't know, the Prince of Zimbabwe or something. I don't know. I mean, we could have been anything. But that wasn't really us. The person we really are always existed, exists now. The exact same person that you really are has always existed and always will exist. It's never lost, it's never past, and it's never waiting to come. It's just you. And matter has always existed and always will exist, although in different forms. And the spiritual world has always existed and always will exist. So when you understand what the real world is, and this isn't it, by the way, I mean, it's actually a big mistake to say things like, this is the real world. This is actually, we are presently in a, what do they call it? Virtual reality machine. Because we are actually eternal souls, but we're inside bodies and we are acting as if we were the body, but we're not. So the body is actually a virtual reality machine. And let's say you see a mountain. Let's say you see a mountain. Well, there's mountains around Las Vegas. So let's say you see a mountain. It's not a real mountain. What it is, I mean, it's real matter. It's really there. But it's actually just material energy shaped into a mountain. I saw this funny billboard, actually, one time when I was driving into Reno, for good reasons. And they had this magnificent, is a huge billboard with this majestic picture of the Sierra Nevada, snow-capped peaks and everything. And then underneath it said, build this, Las Vegas. I mean, they were kind of like competing because, Las Vegas, they build everything from different parts of the world. Said, build this. Anyway, so when you see a mountain, it's not a real mountain. There are real mountains that are actually mountains. They're not just matter shaped into a mountain. They're actually eternal mountains, but they're not the ones we're seeing. So everything we're seeing, every physical object, our bodies, mountains, buildings, everything, oceans, it's really just matter shaped into a particular form. temporarily. And then it becomes something else, and then it becomes something else. So something which today is a mountain, maybe tomorrow in geological time, maybe millions of years from now will be something else. Maybe it'll be, who knows? Maybe it'll be a farm, maybe it'll be an ocean, maybe it'll be an asteroid. So it's not really a mountain. And your body is not really your body, because that matter is just going to become something else. Real things. So in a sense, the Buddhists were right. The Buddhists were right in saying that in a sense, this world is shunya, empty of real things, not because matter doesn't exist, which they knew matter exists, but because there's no object in this world which is really that thing. And the only thing in the universe which is really what it is forever is the soul within living bodies. Those eternal souls are really souls forever, and they never become something else, but they become covered by bodies. Like, for example, let's say a traffic light, red, yellow, and green light. Actually, it's all white light, pure light, but when the pure light goes through a red filter, it manifests as red light, or a yellow or green filter. Behind all those filters, there's the same light. So when your consciousness goes through a baby body, you experience baby consciousness. When it goes through a child body, an adolescent body, then you experience adolescent consciousness. But behind that filter of the body, there is pure spiritual consciousness. And so there's nothing in this physical world which is really what it appears to be, because it's all just matter itself shaped into a mountain, a body, a this or that, temporarily, and then being shaped into something else. So that's time. So
yeah, but my question. Yes. My question was, a transcendentalist, a true transcendentalist, he may or she may see the permutations of matter, but what do they actually experience? What's their reality?
That this is Krishna's energy presently shaped into a mountain or a car or a tree or a toothbrush or whatever. That this is all just Krishna's energy, which is now shaped into and functioning as that particular thing.
But on the other hand, do they have a vision of what is permanent as well?
Yeah, themselves and everyone else. We are all permanent. We are all permanent. We are all eternal. So, Danesa and Devin, good old Devin.
So I have two questions. I don't want to usurp the time here, but usually in spiritual culture, and especially in modern day yoga culture, when it's presented to somebody who's new to it, it's presented as like crystals and chakras and self-help books and cacao ceremonies. But what's interesting is that in yoga culture, it's presented that way. But when we read a key text like Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is presenting it first as spiritual self-realization, the understanding that we're not the body, but we're a spirit soul. So, and even in the Yoga Sutras, it seems like Patanjali kind of leads in with that through meditation, we can attain self-realization. So why in yoga culture is that really what we should be emphasizing as an entry-level idea, the idea that we're a spirit soul? Why is that so important as a prerequisite?
Personally, I just like being honest with people. And I just sort of have, and this is just me, I sort of have an aversion to manipulating people. And, like I tell people, okay, it's this. Okay, but now that you're kind of hooked, actually it's that. I think that ultimately we could save a lot of time and we could sort of identify people who are really ready for true spiritual life by just telling the truth. And I think we should tell the truth in a diplomatic way that doesn't offend people. We should be, sensitive and try to find a language and a way of speaking that people can accept. And here I can quote no less an authority than Mary Poppins. A little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down. So yeah, you can put, of course, now sugar, that's kind of a bad thing. I guess today she would say Mary Poppins, a little bit of stevia or something else. But anyway, so yeah, we can try to sweeten the pill, but the medicine has to be there. The medicine has to be, because you may have this chakra or that chakra or the other chakra, but you aren't a chakra, you're a soul. And the real point. So I like to just treat people with that respect of telling them what I'm really thinking. And I try to do it politely, diplomatically, persuasively, interestingly, but I want to tell them the truth. And my teacher, Prabhupada, of course, I learned that from him because he had incredible integrity. In fact, there's this great line in the Bhagavatam where there was a king who had a guru, because in those days, thousands of years ago, everyone had their gurus, and then he met a self-realized soul, Narada Muni, who taught him about the soul and what God actually is. And so then the king said, it's a great line, he said that I don't think that my teachers themselves really understood this. And because he said, King na bruyur vidur jadi, which in Sanskrit means, why wouldn't they have spoken it if they actually knew it? It's an ancient statement, which still, I think, really, is powerful. King na bruyur, why wouldn't they have spoken it vidur jadi if they knew it? So ultimately, if someone for their own satisfaction or amusement or interest or whatever wants to do all these other things, it's a free country. But if someone is interested in self-realization seriously and in actually uncovering their eternal self and actually finding out what God is, and God is actually not just a menacing being who probably needs a whole series of 12-step programs, for anger management, jealousy, or whatever. Krishna, God is infinitely beautiful, and infinitely loving and infinitely humorous. Any conception of God in which God has no sense of humor is not really that advanced. So that's Krishna. So that's, so I think, that's what we should present. I think we should respect people and be honest with them and act with integrity. Just tell them this is who we are and this is what we're teaching, and do it as diplomatically and interestingly as possible, but tell the truth.
Thank you.
So anything else?
Yeah, looks like Louise or Jeff Holcomb have a question.
Sure.
Hi.
Hey.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I had a question about the origin of the universe, about of this universe we understand as, and the syllable Om, because yes. How I was taught, or how I imagined the thing to go was the Om was first, kind of how the big the theory of the Big Bang is that came first and then everything. But I don't know if you have more you could explain that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. By the way, are you from England?
Yeah, I'm from London.
Oh, London. I'm an Anglophile. I actually, what kind of got me into it was first Charles Dickens, and then Jane Austen. In fact, I spent months writing books in Jane Austen's village in Hampshire.
Oh wow, cool.
Yes,
Wow.
about an hour and a half southwest of London.
Okay, cool. I haven't been there. Hampshire? No, I haven't been there. I'm from Southeast London.
Oh,
I'm in Vegas. And this is Jeff.
Hello.
Where are you from?
I'm from originally, I was born in the Philippines. My parents were in the military, so we moved around a lot.
Oh, well, thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Thank
you
you
for being here with us.
So as far as Om or Omkara, as it's sometimes called, phonetically, the word Om actually has 3 phonetic elements, which are AUM. And I mean, actually the modern academic discipline of linguistics was created by the discovery of ancient Sanskrit grammar, because the ancient Sanskritists thousands of years ago had a completely scientific understanding of phonetics, phonology, language, and so on. So they understood that the sort of the diphthong, the complex vowel O, is a combination of and u. Like if you say it very quickly, O, it's actually u, and so and om. So so you find in the ancient Upanishads, these very, very old literatures, Sanskrit literatures, where they analyze these 3 elements, and they sort of take Om as somehow a combination of 3 elements, and they speculate in, you know, many ways, like A is the universe, and U is this, and M is that, and so I mean, those speculations in the early Upanishads themselves indicate that they understood that that Om, this sound, was somehow of cosmic significance. And ultimately, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita says that actually Om, that I am Om, that Om is a manifestation of God. So it's interesting because you could say the Vedic theology or philosophical theology is extremely sophisticated and complex, and it's understood that God is one, but that they're just innumerable aspects of God, and God can be understood ontologically, phonetically, and another very important thing about Om, if I could mention it. So when you say Om, it's like invoking the divine. And I think one of the most important things about Om is that it establishes clearly in this ancient culture that language itself is not intrinsically mundane. And so you have different traditions that try to sell you this, you know, package of ineffability, which means that, you know, the truth, we can't describe the truth with words, which is basically nonsense. Because if you say you can't describe the truth with words, I mean, obviously, you know, experience itself is what we're ultimately going for, but words can be a very reliable, powerful roadmap. And because saying that you can't describe the truth with words is actually prejudicing the whole thing toward impersonalism, because language is a very personal thing. In fact, we express personal feelings. I mean, simple words like "I love you" can change a person's life dramatically. And so words are very powerful. And so if, as I pointed out, if originally and ultimately the absolute truth, the source of everything, is personal, which is why we are personal, then language, being a very personal thing, is logically an intrinsic component of personal spiritual life. And if we think that ultimately you're going to be something impersonal, which to me is hellish, Now, can you imagine you're going to spend all eternity without ever falling in love, without ever just talking to anyone, without ever appreciating beauty? Because, you know, one important philosophical question is, can you really think non-verbally? If you consider that when you're thinking about things like, you know, he loves me not, she loves me not, or should I go, should I not go, should I do this, should I not do this? If you think about it, when you think, in a sense, you're thinking verbally. And of course, you experience things like, you can say just experience a beautiful scene, but I would say intrinsic, and let's say you just come to a beautiful scene of nature, a snow-capped mountain or a, you know, crystalline lake or something, and you're just taking in the beauty of it. But actually, really intrinsic, even if unstated in that perception of extraordinary beauty, is the understanding that this is a transparent, pure body of water, that is a majestic mountain. And the proof is that if someone says to you, why was it so breathtaking? And then you explain. And so words are not intrinsically mundane. We can use language in a material way, selfishly or ignorantly, and so on. So language can be covered by material consciousness, but language itself is ultimately spiritual. It ultimately exists, and it's the most amazing thing. In fact, one of the reasons why we all have such bad experiences when we call up some number and we get a robot instead of a human, and you're just desperately trying to find a button you can push to get a human, is because language is so surprisingly and unexpectedly sophisticated that even with all of the modern technology, it's very hard to train machines to use language in the same way that humans do. And so the fact that we're talking to each other, your ability to understand what I'm saying, or I can understand what you're saying, it's much more sophisticated and much more advanced than people imagine. And I won't get into all the details of grammar and everything, but so ultimately, because the truth is personal, because the universe is personal, because you are personal, and you are personal in your best moments, when you are most empathic, when you are most sympathetic, when you are most loving, when you are kindest. In other words, when you are most personal, that is you at your best. That is you at your most realized, self-realized. So therefore language, so Om. So it's important that these ancient Upanishads, like the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad and others, that they actually see a word as having cosmic significance and even causal power. And they're attributing all these things, these sacred qualities, to ultimately language. And so the very fact that Om, and so to meditate on Om to achieve some impersonal goal is really, it's really not paying attention in a big way. And so the very fact that we meditate on Om or chant Om should tell you right there that ultimately we are aspiring for an infinitely personal reality. So that's Om basically, and all three phonemes, you could say, yeah, all the three elements are have all kinds of significance. So I hope that's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you guys.
You too.
So, yes, that would be Logan.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. And the explanation about language, it's just giving me so much to think about. Is that So it seems to me that Krishna could reveal himself in really to us in almost any way, and I've wondered why Krishna has chosen to reveal himself in language, right, through books, and so I'm just beginning to make the connections. Is it because language is so powerful? Is that the reason why the books are okay?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, it's very interesting what you asked, and I think because, as you say, I think it's true that language is powerful, but also language. How should I put it? They say good fences make good neighbors. And so language also preserves a certain decorum or a certain, like, for example, let's say in a dating service, since I'm a sannyasi, I don't frequent them very often, but so let's say there's like some online dating service. And so, first stage might be where people just talk to each other or they exchange texts or whatever. And so if, let's say, one of the two parties, say the guy is being aggressive and says right away, well, why don't we meet for lunch? And then you might say, well, the girl might say, well, let's just keep talking for now. And so you can see that by talking, you can have a real relationship. You can really exchange important ideas. And yet, because you're not going to meet up yet, it actually, there's a certain reserve about it. And so Krishna is extending this invitation to us, like, if you ever get tired of beating your head against a wall in the material world, you have an open invitation. And so we start out with language, the chanting the Maha Mantra, chanting mantras, or reading books, because on the one hand, it does facilitate real knowledge, real relationship, and yet it still maintains an appropriate level of reserve, considering that we are still not pure souls, and so on. So, and interestingly, as you advance on your spiritual path, proportionately, as you advance, you can actually see also. In fact, it's very interesting in the Bhagavad Gita, in that Gita guide, which somehow I was able to do. Actually, I did it in Santa Monica, California, but Krishna often in the Gita equates knowledge with seeing. That to really know something is to see it. And so just let me finish one thing and then I'll turn it over to you. So this thing about language is that you start with language because it's just like, maybe some kind of, service where you meet someone you want to go out with. And maybe actually physically meeting them comes after a certain amount of trust has been built up and confidence and so on. And so language is in its own way is powerful, it's intimate, but it's also discreet. And then as you advance by taking seriously the language you're receiving, you do start to see. And your, let's say, your power to see grows in exact ratio to your actual surrender to the truth. And so if you think about it, it's an ingenious system.
Thank you so much for that response. And I'm tying, and I know the other people have other questions, but I'm beginning to tie this into another thing that I've been really thinking about is the universal form.
Yes.
And why is it that Krishna decided to show Arjuna the universal form when he did? And now I'm beginning to tie this into this whole idea language and your point about seeing. And so is there a thread that
oh yeah, that's
okay.
that's very relevant. That's a good point. That's completely the same topic. Yes, Krishna showed Arjuna the universal form, kind of tell him, will you please get serious? Because, I mean, ultimately there is the majestic, all-powerful, all-inspiring God. But at the same time, we can actually understand that, but then even move beyond it and develop a very intimate, loving relationship. In other words, I'm not serving God because he's so powerful, he'll, really whoop me upside the head if I don't serve him. It's so, I mean, you can serve someone just like in Russia now, some people are, risking their lives and going to the army because the alternative is even worse. So God doesn't want to coerce you. The point is to develop love, but sometimes he just has to show, hey, here's a little reminder of who I actually am. So we need to be serious here. And that's how Arjuna responded. And if you why did Krishna show that cosmic form? Well, I think the answer is by seeing how Arjuna responded to it. Arjuna basically had a big whoops because he was Krishna's friend and they had an intimate relationship. But the old saying, familiarity breeds contempt. We all know that. That's the danger of intimate relationships, is that you can take the other person for granted. Precisely because when two people, sort of declare themselves that they each love the other, or that it can be a romantic relationship, it can be a deep friendship, whatever. And so the confidence that comes from knowing this person is committed to me, that confidence can lead someone not to be their most attentive, not to be on their best behavior. Because so therefore, even sometimes in intimate relationships, sometimes one or the other person has to be reminded that, there's danger here in not honoring the relationship. And so I think the universal form is to show Arjuna, I'm not only your buddy, but I also made the universe. So, and of course, then Arjuna responded appropriately, and then everything was okay between them. So again, it gets back to that same ratio I was talking about, where we can see to the extent that we are in an appropriate state of consciousness, which makes it the right thing for us to see. Okay? So,
thank you.
Sure, my pleasure. Anant?
Hare Krishna, Acharya Anant here. Firstly, thank you for your time and just seeking your blessings. So my question is more of a personal kind of nature, I guess. It's kind of twofold question, I believe. First part being, a lot of us keep struggling in our daily lives because, by the time probably we get into Bhakti Yoga or we find ourselves here, there are already set patterns in our minds, grooves that our thoughts keep running round and round in. Firstly, how do we break that? And sometimes, intellectually, we can understand what we are talking about, us being spirit souls, and we can verbalize it, but to feel it internally, how do we get to that?
Yeah,
so I think that would be the question.
Good question. There's a very interesting verse in the Bhagavad Gita. Actually, I can give you the number real quick. Let's see. So see if Google will do its duty. Bhagavad Gita, no, let's see. Okay, I'll get it. Vishaya Vinivartante. Okay, I got it. It's verse 259 in the Gita. And Krishna says, Vishaya Vinivartante Niraharasya Dehinam, which means Dehinam, among embodied souls, people like us who are souls and bodies at the present time. The sense objects Vishaya, vinivartante. It's like they pull back. For example, let's say you're trying to be in spiritual consciousness, and yet, let's say we still have within ourselves some lust or some greed or some pride or whatever. And so our senses are kind of being attracted to things that are not really in our self-interest. So Krishna says, niraha rasya, for one who's fasting, literally. In other words, if you just by self-abnegation or by fasting, you kind of weaken the senses and then you don't succumb to them. But Krishna says, Vishayavi nivartante niraha rasya dehinam rasavarjam, but the taste for it is still there. In other words, this is a common monastic strategy, like how do I keep myself celibate and chaste? Okay, fast, fasting or, beating myself or something. And so what Krishna says is, that, okay, if you're fasting and just sort of, starving your body, yeah, you're going to be too weak to be lusty, but you still have the taste for it. So, the next good meal you have, the problem comes back. You can fast and weaken your body, but as soon as you have one good meal, the lust comes back or whatever comes back. And so that's not really simply self-abnegation, simply depriving yourself of things that you really want. It's not going to ultimately take you to the other side. And so Krishna said, Rasavarjang gurasopyasya parang drishtva nivartate. But when you actually experience something much greater, then your taste, literally the word Krishna uses, your taste for that lesser thing goes away. It's like, let's say someone was in a relationship and the other person, done you wrong. Or let's say you're in a relationship and you were faithful, but the other person was not faithful. And therefore the relationship kind of breaks up. Now, and so let's say a person's suffering because, yes, I love this person, I trusted this person. So let's say you then meet someone who actually is more attractive and more interesting in every way, just better for you than the person you lost. When you find that new relationship and you actually, it's an upgrade. This new relationship is actually an upgrade, then you don't really think about what you lost because you've actually gained, not lost. And that's what Krishna's saying. So, and he says, Drishtva, though, and this is the point I wanted to make, he says, upon seeing something better, something higher, something greater. And so the real way to advance spiritually is that we have to have an experience of something greater. So it's not just faith. It's interesting because I, dabble also in academic philosophy. And there's a group of scholars who are Christian philosophers. I mean, they're good philosophers. They're highly educated and they teach in universities and they're Christians. And what I find very interesting is that in the arguments they give in favor of religious faith, sort of sophisticated philosophical arguments, they're always arguing in favor of faith. And which it seems strange to me because I'm coming from a tradition where we talk about experience, like you actually experience something. You don't just believe in it. And they don't really make arguments like that, interestingly. And of course, you could analyze why that's the case. So we are following rules. And one time when I first took sannyas, renounced order of life, I was 23 years old and renounced the world several years before my frontal cortex was fully developed. But still, somehow Krishna saved me. So I wrote Prabhupada a letter in 1972, just after I took sannyas, and I told Prabhupada that I'm now traveling around America to universities and lecturing in universities. And Prabhupada wrote back, he was happy to hear that, and he said to me, don't present Krishna consciousness just a bunch of rules. He said, ultimately, it's sublime philosophy. It's the most sublime philosophy. So Let's say, for example, you're on a commercial flight and they say, fasten your seatbelt. It's not just a rule for the sake of a rule. There's a very good reason for you to fasten your seatbelt on a flight, because you may hit what they call clear air turbulence, which the radar doesn't pick up. And, you need to have your seatbelt fastened, or maybe you're in a turbulent area, you need to have your seat. So to me, I don't feel like I'm following rules in my own personal practice. I feel like I'm practicing a science. And I can honestly say that everything I'm doing in my life, and I can't think of an exception, I'm doing for a very good reason. I'm doing it for a very good reason. It's a science. So ultimately, what Krishna is saying is, to be really fixed in your spiritual practice, you have to have experiences. Because ultimately, it's about love. For example, let's say you're going out, let's say you meet someone and you go out with them one time and you think, maybe, could be. And then let's say the relationship gets more serious. And then as, let's say, the two people become more serious about each other, then the rules start. If it's just one date, obviously neither the person has the right to say, you can't go out with anyone else, or you can't do this or that, because it's just, you just met this person. And there's no real commitment. But as the people grow closer together, the commitment increases, and a commitment necessarily, intrinsically involves rules of the road. Because as people commit to each other, the relationships have to be reciprocal. If they're not reciprocal, they're lousy. And ultimately they're hurtful. Relationships are good when they're reciprocal. And so as people come closer together and become more serious about each other, there have to be rules of the road. Because the people are giving more. And when you give more, the other person has to give more. And there are ways to monitor levels of giving. And so the rules in a serious relationship are not whimsical or just rules for the sake of rules. They define the necessary conditions to experience profound love and to have a meaningful, loving relationship. So I can say in my own life, everything I'm doing, I know exactly why I'm doing it. I have very good reason to do it. It's in my rational self-interest, and it works. So therefore, we have to come to the point of bhakti. Bhakti cannot be reduced down to a mechanical process. It's like, let's say, for example, you know how to build a jet engine. And you can be a good person, a bad person. You can be obnoxious. You can be charming. You can be faithful in your relationships. You can be unfaithful, but whatever. But the point is, if you know how to build a jet engine and you build it, it's going to work like a jet engine, because it's a mechanical process. It's not about your attitude. It's just about putting the right pieces in the right places. But bhakti, in fact, any relationship, any serious relationship, cannot be reduced down to mechanics. There's the personal aspect. You can chant Hare Krishna and you can be thinking about a million other things. And so, therefore, if you want more powerful spiritual experience, not just following rules or believing something, then you have to really approach Krishna in a very personal way. Not just as the automatic outcome of rule compliance.
Thank you so much, Acharya Dev.
My pleasure. So, Logan, you had another question?
No, I think his arm must be getting tired because his hand is still up. But we'll go ahead and take Acharya Dev, it's okay. Harley has wanted to present maybe our last question for tonight.
Sure.
Hare Krishna, I'm coming to you from London.
Hey, another London girl.
Yeah. It kind of connects to what you were just saying. One of the main themes of our conversation from our last meeting and our WhatsApp group has been how in modern day, it's not always the easiest to have what would be considered maybe a traditional relationship, with things like offerings and being kind of strict. It's like you said, it's not all about rules, and a few of us has mentioned having things that maybe hinder us from doing things like food offerings every day and things like that, but we compensate in other ways and make the relationship personal. I just wondered if there was anything that you found, because you seem to travel a lot and you're very busy, that you do that's maybe unconventional way of having that strong relationship.
Thank you for that question. It's like that old song about Santa Claus. He knows when you've been naughty, he knows when you've been nice. And so intention counts a lot. So if you're actually doing your best, no one, including Krishna, can ask you to do more than your best. And so, of course, if I say I'm doing my best, but I'm really not, I'm kind of, gliding, then of course I can't expect to get the same result. But if you're sincere and you're in a particular situation in life or a particular circumstance, but you really do your best, you do it sincerely, and your intention is really loving, then you get points. So what do they say in yoga classes? Fix your intention. So yes, it's just do your very best. And ultimately we all have to find sort of like a sustainable cruising altitude. Because as you know, it's like if you're in it for the long haul, if you're a long distance runner, it's not the same as sprinting, 100 yards. By the way, can't help mention this because we have two London girls here. Do you know the story of Roger Bannister?
No.
He was an Englishman. I read this when I was a kid because I used to really love sports and I used to read about, famous athletes and everything. And so Roger Bannister was a British boy. And back in the day, in fact, I'll tell you real quickly exactly when he was born, but it's very interesting. It's sort of relevant to this. He was born in 1929, passed away in 2018. Anyway, when he was a kid, they had all these like furnaces, in English homes, like, coal fires and everything. And so he was trapped and, he was burned, seriously burned as a child, as a kid. And his legs were burned. And the doctor said he would never walk again. And he was so determined that he was just determined that he was going to walk again. And he kept trying to walk and walking. And then he started running. And to make a long story short, he's the first person in history that broke the 4-minute mile, that he ran a mile in less than 4. No one could do it. All the greatest athletes, no one could break that barrier of running a mile in 4 minutes. He was the first person to do it. And the doctor said that he would never run, he would never walk again. So your best is not going to look like someone else's best. However, it is your best. And all the people that do their best, in a sense, are equally pleasing Krishna. Let's say you have 3 children, and say one of them is 6 years old, and one is 8, and one is 10, and they're in different grades in school. So obviously they have different levels of understanding of everything, from simple maths, you say, I think in England, maths and or spelling or this or that. But the mother or the father, they're equally pleased. It's not like, they slap around the 6-year-old because he can't perform like a 10-year-old. I mean, that's absurd. So you are I mean, Krishna loves you, and he says 3 times in the Gita said he's the father of the universe, the mother, and he's your best friend. Krishna says several times in the Gita that he's your loving friend. And so Krishna knows that based on just your situation in past lives and this life, that you're actually doing your best. You get full credit. And, my best, your best, someone else's best, it may look different, but we're actually all, in a sense, equally pleasing Krishna because we're all doing our best. In fact, someone may appear to be more spiritually advanced, but they may not be doing their best. They may be sort of, taking it easy. I'll tell you a story, actually, that illustrates this. In 1972, as a young sannyasi, I was actually at the University of Oregon in Eugene. I was doing program actually in Corvallis, Oregon State. And so we heard that Prabhupada was going to be in New York. So we flew out to New York to see Prabhupada. And so when I walked into Prabhupada's room, he was just finishing breakfast. Prabhupada was very jovial. I mean, he would joke a lot also. And so he just had a nice breakfast. He was in a very jovial mood. He's kind of joking with me. And then he told me how much he appreciated the program I was doing, because I was traveling around to American universities and trying to convince people about this. And so Prabhupada was so kind to me and seemed so pleased that naturally, my head just sort of measurably swelled a bit. And so I thought, wow, Prabhupada, and I thought, this is great. Prabhupada really likes what I'm doing. So I thought I'll go back in the afternoon and, I can get some more praise. So I went back that afternoon to Prabhupada's room, and my head was slightly larger than it had been in the morning. And there was a young girl in Prabhupada's room who was just sort of, cleaning, straightening up the room, tidying up, dusting and everything. And in terms of the ISKCON pecking order, she was just a young girl. She had no position in ISKCON, just a, nice young girl that had taken up the practice. And I was this, sannyasi, I was this leader. But what's interesting is that at that moment, Prabhupada, of course, completely ignored me. And because he detected my pride, and he gave all his attention to this girl. And he spoke to her in a very loving way. I mean, very loving, like a loving father, almost like a loving grandfather. And he was telling her, what's your name, and this and that, and how old are you, and thank you so much, you're doing very nice. He was just sort of really being very loving and kind to her, and just completely ignoring me. And I realized at that moment, it was a very good lesson. I never forgot, because at that moment, she was the one who was really more Krishna conscious. I was this, sannyasi with all my position and everything. But at that moment, she was actually much more Krishna conscious. She was much more in the right consciousness. And so Prabhupada gave all his attention to her and simply ignored me. And I learned a good lesson. So, you're sincere. So if you do your best, then your life is perfect. Whatever it looks like externally, that you did this or didn't do that, if it's actually your best, then you get an A. Or what do they, I don't know what they say in England, like the grades. They have some other way of classifying things, but anyway, so if you actually do your best, then it's perfect. Just like, let's say, loving parents with their child, the child is, maybe just, when you're a kid, I don't know if they do it in England, but in America, that when you're like 5, 6 years old, they have you draw little pictures and everything, and then you take them home and give them to your parents. And I remember I had very good parents. I was very fortunate, very good, loving parents. And they were always so pleased. They were delighted. And, technically it wasn't that great, just a little kid. But my parents loved it because it was given with love, and I did my best. And so it's just like that. You're Krishna's child. And if you're doing your best, he will be with you always.
Thank you for taking my question. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, what an uplifting and encouraging way to end this session. So thank you so much for answering all of our questions and for offering your time, Srila Charyadev. And I hope that as we keep reading your comprehensive guide and as we start to have more questions, you'll be willing to meet up with us again.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. You're a really good group.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Srila Charyadev, and we hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone, take care. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.